Welcome to Civitas LA, where we feature diverse and emerging leaders who make up this dynamic region and are creating community every day and building a better tomorrow. Each week, we hear from, learn from, and are inspired by a new generation of civic entrepreneurs who are forging a path forward in making Los Angeles a stronger, more resilient, and connected group of citizens. Now, more than ever, we aim to elevate civic discourse, foster community connections, and promote civic knowledge and engagement across the greater Los Angeles region while elevating diverse and emerging voices in this conversation. We really are excited today to kick off a three-part conversation as we navigate, investigate, and learn more about all the transformation taking place in the city of Inglewood. Inglewood is just 9 square miles located in the southwest corner of Los Angeles County, sitting about 3.5 miles away from Los Angeles International Airport and adjacent to really all the action happening on the west side of LA, whether that's Santa Monica, Venice, Silicon Beach, and not far from Culver City. Inglewood is home to just over 109,000 people, making it the 12th largest city within the 88 cities of LA County. And demographically, Inglewood is a vast majority Black and brown community, 42% Black, 49% Hispanic or Latino. And within the last 5 or 10 years, Inglewood has experienced unprecedented development, and many community organizations and residents do worry that these changes will lead to disruption and displacement. With us today, calling in, we're pleased to have D'Artagnan Scorza, who's the founder and executive director of the Social Justice Learning Institute. The SJLI, formed in 2008, was to empower individuals to stand up, create change, and help their communities thrive. And since that time, they've principally served youth of color through educational programs, worked to enhance food security, and worked to improve the built environment, all amidst a very fast-changing city of Inglewood. D'Artagnan, thank you for calling in today. We appreciate you here.
So grateful to be here, and thank you for having me.
Let's jump right on in. D'Artagnan, you've got a very diverse, very interesting background. So share with our audience a little bit about your background and your journey to this point here now.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you for having me on today's episode. And I got to tell you, I grew up here in Inglewood, right? So for me, Inglewood is home. It's where I went to school. It's where I graduated from. And it was, because of the folk here in Inglewood that I was able to make it to UCLA and, ultimately return to my community. And so I am a native son of this community, and I, know what it feels like to have grown up during a time when many folk, like me, were facing concentrated disadvantage, right? We're dealing with issues related to poverty, but also dealing and able to access opportunities because of the people here in this community. It was a very, very, very special place with some amazing community members and leaders who are very much concerned about the future of youth and the future of our city.
Excellent. Well, D'Artagnan, I know you had a stint in the U.S. Navy and you served in the Iraq War, so thank you for your service. I'm interested to learn about that experience and how that informed your sense of community as you returned from service.
Yeah, I went to UCLA straight out of high school, straight from Morningside High in Inglewood. And in 2001, I was, traveling overseas. I had done a study abroad program with UCLA in South Africa, and that really opened up my understanding of the world, right? I had grown up, as I mentioned here, in concentrated disadvantage. I remember me and my father, for example, in a halfway house when I was a child, right? Like that's one of my earliest memories of him. And having had those experiences, when I got to South Africa, I started seeing the world very differently because for the first time in my life, I understood that not only was poverty relative, but that I still had a lot of privilege, although I had grown up with so many challenges myself as a young man here in America. So I was, just returned from South Africa. I was staying with a friend on the East Coast, and 9/11 happened. And when a 9/11 happened, it really sort of, I ended up actually seeing the smoke come down from the towers. I was staying in Jersey, and it moved me. I was moved. I think I just come back from South Africa. I was like, okay, this is what it means to be a person of African descent, but also someone who's an American. And I really owned that identity. And so when the smoke came down, I said, I want to take care of my home. I want to take care of my family. I want to take care of the people that I grew up with. I'm going to take care of the land that I'm from, and make sure that I can do my part to help protect, our country. And so I signed up to join the U.S. Navy. I was deployed around the world. I got stationed and did my basic training in Chicago. We got stationed in Mississippi and eventually in San Diego, and decided to serve, and was eventually deployed to Iraq. And it was in the context of sort of going through. It was because I went through those experiences that I understood how much agency I had and how important it was for me to serve my community as well. So, it's important to serve our country. It's important to serve, our families. But I realized that going into the military helped me understand the value and the importance of service to those I cared about and loved.
No, that's great. And again, thank you for that service. So when you returned to the United States, how did this inform your desire to start the Social Justice Learning Institute? What were you seeing here in Inglewood that compelled you to start this organization? And what communities are you serving through this organization?
That's a really great question. Thank you for asking it. So when I returned from Iraq, I had a family member who reached out to me and he said, "Hey, Dart, if I don't leave South LA, I'm gonna die." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "I think somebody's gonna kill me." And I said, "Okay, well, how can I be of support?" And he says, "Well, can I come and stay with you?" And I said, "Yeah, you can." So he came to live with me in San Diego. And then I had another cousin who wasn't getting involved. He was just getting ready to graduate high school, and he wanted to go to college. And he asked if he can come and live with me as well. And I said, "Sure." And about a couple of weeks before he was going to move with me, he was shot and killed in our neighborhood. And that tore me up because um, like I said, I was at this place where I was, committed to service for my country. But in that moment, I realized that I had to do more for my community. So that's actually what led me to sort of a life of service and what led me to build SJLI. Because I went to a number of organizations in LA and I asked them, how we could begin to address these issues facing young Black males, how we can address issues related to uh, uh, policing in our community, how we can address issues related to sort of educational opportunity and attainment, related to incarceration and the impact of mass incarceration, the impact it had on my own life with my own dad, right? And so, I talked to some mentors and and they said, "Well, look, Dart, you don't have to wait on other people to do anything. You could do something yourself." And so I decided to launch a program at my alma mater, Morningside High School in Inglewood. And it was in the I in launching that program, I began to see some early success with some of our young folk. And so my first graduating class of students, all of them either went to a 2 or 4 year university or a trade school. And I knew that I had to do something to sustain that work. And so SJLI was birthed out of both the pain that I experienced with my own family, but also the recognition that we have power in our communities to create change. And then working with those young men, it taught me that I could do more.
So that's great. So share with us a brief overview of the work of SJLI for our audience and the communities that you serve, whether that's demographic or geographic.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Social Justice Learning Institute, when people ask me what we do, I say, yeah, we help our young folk get to college. Yes, we're addressing issues related to food insecurity. We're absolutely pushing for environmental justice. We're supporting the needs of our families that are facing housing issues and our housing burden. But really, what we're in the business of is building people, right? That's what we do. And so we work with our youth, especially, and many residents in our communities, to help them understand through our educational programs how to utilize their agency and their power to create change, to create thriving communities. So, for example, we have classes that are in schools that are, in some cases, A through G certified, but are also accredited by those schools. And based upon a curricula that I actually designed through my graduate studies at UCLA. And the students in that program understand what it means to become youth leaders, but they also learn what it's going to take to conduct research in their community. So they're doing college level coursework. They are evaluating the pathway they need to take in order to get into college. And so they're going through all of these experiences and they're learning what they need to learn in order to get to college and to change conditions in their communities. And then they'll take that with them and do something about it in the neighborhood. So, for example, one of our classes wanted to address, rather, they were doing research on the food environment, living in a food desert or food swamp, as we would call it now. And they looked in their neighborhood and realized that they didn't have a lot of access to healthy food. And so they decided to build the first community garden here in the city of Inglewood. And that effort led to building 100 community school and home gardens. Actually ended up being 122 in total. Because people in our community came together and they said, look, we love what these young men are doing. We want to support that. We want to be a part of it. And we want to, build more of these for youth. And so when those young folk, went to build some of those gardens, they learned that they could not build them in apartment buildings because tenants did not have the rights to actually have a garden in their, on their porch or in their backyard or wherever the case may be. And so we then worked with, at the time, it was Assemblymember Stephen Bradford, now Senator Bradford, to craft legislation allowing tenants who live in multi-unit complexes to actually have their own garden.
Excellent. Well, I know, empowerment through education is a key goal. What are some of the main programs that you've put forth to deliver on that priority?
It's a great question. So we've launched a number of programs for our young folk. One of them is called the Urban Health Fellowship, which trains young men of color, African American and Latino males, to pursue careers in the allied health and medical fields. Another program we have is our Healthy Eating and Active Living program, and that's allowed us to train folk in our community on sort of strategies to cook and eat healthier and help them, adhere to their own sort of cultural food practices. More recently, we launched a COVID relief program, and that's an ongoing food distribution program where we're working with an amazing partner, Food Forward, here in Los Angeles, to recover food that comes off the docks that may not have an order to go to, and then redistribute that food to folk in our community. And so we're actually supporting 17 partner agencies in LA, in the South Bay, rather, where we serve as a hub. And we're distributing around 40,000 pounds of fresh fruits and veggies a week to those agencies, as well as to hundreds of families on a weekly basis in our neighborhood. And in addition to that, partnering with people like Congresswoman Waters and Janelle Monáe through their One to Lunch efforts to distribute food to thousands of families in and throughout South Los Angeles.
So I know one element of your empowerment efforts is the Urban Scholars Program, which is designed to increase academic achievements and help kids transition into colleges. So share more about this particular initiative and how do you coordinate this with your work as well as being a member of the Inglewood School Board?
That's a great question. Thank you again for it. And I can tell you that, the Urban Scholars Program came out of that work I mentioned to you earlier when I returned to my alma mater at Morningside High School to support young men of color. I wanted to initially build a program that was addressing incarceration, recidivism, and imprisonment and death rates amongst young men of color. But what I quickly came to realize was that it was about something more than that. And the goal was to really build a group of leaders who could return to our own community and create change. That became the Urban Scholars Program. And what it essentially is, as I mentioned earlier, it's a class that students take where they learn about college preparation, they learn about conducting community research, they also learn what it means to become social justice youth leaders who will go out and create change in their communities. I'm proud of the work that we do. We have nearly 100% graduation rate. And often it ranges between like 93 and 100%. If we don't get our young folk to graduate by, the spring when they're intended, we'll typically make sure they graduate by the fall, because we're often working with young folk who are either formerly incarcerated and are on probation, who are in, continuation or alternative school settings, who need credit and course recovery. It's not a program to cream, right? We're working with students who most often are not being supported within our institutions. And so we want to make sure they have a fair shot.
And let me ask you, and how many students are you serving through this particular program or the combination of programs?
Yeah, we're in 21 schools here in LA, 4 in Houston, and are serving over 500 youth per year in that program, not including our thousands of alumni.
Well, I saw that you had a video on your website with the Urban Scholars trip that they had to Ghana about a year or so ago, and I think you've had a number of international trips. So how did that come about? I'm really interested.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I, when I was working with our young men, we would talk about, we're African Americans came from, right? Where people of African descent had come from. And often our history books only tell us a short story about our origin, right? Uh, Most often they don't talk about the history of African Americans prior to slavery. And so what I wanted to do years ago was take our young folk to see where most of our ancestors had come from. And so the trip to Ghana last year was our second sort of study tour. And we had the opportunity to go to many of the slave castles. The students went to the slave bath, and we went to Jamestown,
And up the Cape Coast.
and we went up the Cape Coast. Yeah, so we're in Ghana, um, and that's where
Yeah.
75% of the remaining slave structures are at. And it was intended to help them understand their history and to understand that there was a history of Africans and African Americans prior to
Right.
slavery, right? And so by doing that, my goal was to really allow them to broaden their understanding and identity, to help them recognize who they are, where they come from, what our history is, and to reground that history in truth, as opposed to sort of what we learn here in our schools, which may not always be true.
How many programs have you taken, and where's the next trip, and how is this particular program supported?
That's a great. So we're in COVID right now, and because we're dealing with this pandemic, right? We're in this pandemic. It has certainly made it impossible to travel. So we were actually planning to take another group this summer. So it's an annual trip we started a couple of years ago. The first round, we took them to South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Ethiopia, and they were in awe. I'll tell you a brief story about one of the young men we took. He was one of our students in my program in high school. He made it to college, and he decided he wanted to leave college. He'd actually left for about a year. And I said, you know what? Look, why don't you come on this trip with us? I think it'll really help you see the world differently. Because I wanted him to go back and to finish, because I wanted him to, achieve the goals that he had set out for himself. Not that college is required for everyone, but in this particular case, he was excited. He wanted to do it, but he was having a hard time. So we went to South Africa. He went around. We went around the country, and he was just blown away. He was blown away as I was when I was 20 years old. He was blown away by um, the challenges people face, but also the joy they had. He was blown away by the opportunities that fewer folk had than the ones he even had. So, but he was also blown away by the resilience and the desire to sort of do better in their lives, and to contribute to their community, and to improve conditions despite the levels of disadvantage that people may have had. And so he told me, he said one of the students that he met when he was over there was a college age student, and the student said to my student, he said, look, if I were in your position in America, he said, I would be going to college right now. He says, we don't have financial aid programs. We don't
Right.
have student loan programs. Our parents have to work and put us through college, if we even have a college that we can take advantage of. And for my student, that really opened his mind. He said, I need to take advantage of the opportunities I have, but I also need to be able to pay it forward and give back to others.
And can you share where's that student now? What was what were his next steps? I'm curious to know.
I am so glad you asked. He actually went back the following year. We got him some scholarships. He went back the following year, and he graduated this past year. And then literally about 2 weeks ago, and this is why it came to mind, about 2 weeks ago, he came over to me and he said, I have a gift for you. He called me and says, I have a gift for you. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, I need to come by and I need to see you. I said, well, bring your mask. So he came by my house, and he dropped off a copy of his diploma.
Wow.
And so I now have a copy of his diploma sitting with me in my study, and I'm just, that brings me so much joy and so much pride,
Absolutely.
because he said, Dr. Scorza, if you didn't sort of believe in me, then this wouldn't have happened.
And I'm just curious about this young person. What are his next steps after college? What's he planning to do? What does he want to do?
So now he's actually working in business. He actually moved into to sales. So
Okay.
here's
Okay.
the other thing. He came by to bring me a gift, but he was also trying to sell me a product. So
Well, I hope you
he
bought.
I tested the waters. He was
Mhm.
actually selling. He was doing solar cells. So I did a
Okay.
meeting, and I was like, okay,
Okay.
this is good.
That's good.
We'll see.
That's great. Well, let's transition a little bit because I know you do a lot of work around the issues of systems change, and there's a lot of conversation now, particularly in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd, around systems that need to change. And we just had an episode with Chris Essel from Southern California Grantmakers and a recent conference that they had around their philanthropy and the funding of systems change. So, how do you view this issue, and what role is your organization playing in this regard?
So for us, changing systems is all about transforming the policies and the practices that create the material conditions we face, right?
Hmm.
Um, you know, the war on poverty and the war on drugs led to mass incarceration for a lot of folk in our communities. And as you can see now, there's been a public health response to the opioid epidemic, right?
Hmm.
That could have been the same response that took place back when our communities were facing the challenges we were dealing with in the past as well, largely challenges that were outside of our controls, right?
Hmm.
There was white flight that happened in our communities. We were already dealing with redlining. There was a lack of opportunities. The manufacturing economy and industrial economy was changing before our eyes, so a lot of people in our communities were losing their jobs, right? There was a divestment from public institutions, increased levels of segregation. There were a lot of things that were happening in the 70s and 80s that led to the epidemics that Black and Brown folks, specifically African Americans, faced. So when I think about systems change, I think about the historical context. I think about the political context that affects our lives. And in our organization, we work to not only understand that context, but to take what we know about that context and actually propose alternatives to the policies and the practices that are in place so that we can address the root cause of the issues we may be facing. And so our young folk, for example, are trained to be community leaders who are able to utilize their voice and advocate so that the policies that will better affect them can be passed, that will
Hmm.
affect them and improve their lives can be passed. So, for example, one of our young men, Laquan Muhammad, who also grew up with his father incarcerated for very similar reasons as to mine, right? My father was incarcerated for drug use, as was his. Laquan got involved in helping to pass Proposition 47,
Okay.
which reclassified nonviolent felonies into misdemeanors and changed sort of our criminal justice system here in California. And Laquan, as soon as it was passed, he got a call from his dad, and his dad said, "Look, I'm coming home," and he said, "That's amazing."
Yep.
Right? Like that's the work I've been doing. I did that work because I wanted you to come home, to be here
Absolutely.
for my brothers, to be here for me, to be here for our family. And so I understand that we all have personal responsibility for things in our lives, but our systems and our institutions can better respond to the challenges we may be facing. Right? If someone's facing issues with an addiction, there can be an alternative response. It doesn't have to require incarceration. Right? It could be support, mental health support, drug treatment and rehabilitation. Because when you go to affluent communities, that's what happens there.
So, with respect to empowering through education, you have the additional platform and leadership role as president of the board of the Inglewood School District. Share with us your work there and how you're working to advance systems change through the school district.
I have to say, Inglewood Unified School District has been home for me. I mean, it's where I went to school. It's where I grew up, and um, it has certainly had its fair share of challenges. But I'm really proud of the hard work that we are doing and have done in our schools. We have a new superintendent slash county administrator who is working diligently to improve outcomes for our young folk, academic outcomes. We are improving our facilities throughout the entire district, working hard to attract families. My son and my daughter are both in schools in Inglewood. We have dual language immersion programs, career technical education programs, and those are the types of things that I've been proud to help usher into our district. And as president of the school board, I've had the pleasure and the honor of working with our teachers and our faculty, our teachers rather, and our staff uh, to um, to make sure that our system is working for all of our children. And so I'm proud of the hard work that's being done in the district, and I'm proud of the direction that we're headed in, because I think that people who grew up in Inglewood remember Inglewood Unified School as being school district as being the jewel of the South Bay.
Right.
And so, it was once considered one of the best places to educate a black child. I have to say, my son is in school here in the district, and he's meeting and exceeding state standards. My daughter's in a dual language immersion program. She's reading Spanish to me every day,
Mm-hmm.
and she just started kindergarten. So
Wow.
I think
Okay.
it's a beautiful community, and certainly one that is worthy of having a school district that works for everyone of our children.
No, absolutely. And I know, creating thriving communities is another priority area. So we're going to talk about that a little bit because I'm just going to reference an article from Curbed Los Angeles, which talked about the impact of SoFi Stadium, which is the new stadium home to the Los Angeles Rams and Los Angeles Chargers. And it noted that the cost of renting in Inglewood is soaring, thanks in part to Hollywood Park's redevelopment, the SoFi Stadium development, and obviously the Forum redevelopment and the prospective Clippers Stadium development. So a lot is happening in Inglewood that, on the surface obviously is very, very positive for the community, but at the same time, the costs for many are rising substantially. So what are the challenges of trying to create a thriving community amidst so much change facing this relatively compact and small community?
That's a great question. One of the reasons why the cost of rents and homes have skyrocketed here in Inglewood is certainly because of the development that we're seeing, but also because of speculation in the marketplace. So a lot of investors have flooded Inglewood. They've come to our community. They've purchased up a lot of the single-family home stock, and they've sat on it. And they have what's called a buy and hold strategy. And so what once used to be an availability of homes at an affordable rate, we're sort of, is no longer the case, right? So I think, we have all of these people that afford it and have seen money. Inglewood is sort of their money bag, right? It's their place where they can extract value and extract wealth. And so my organization has worked very hard to push our city to adopt policies that will help manage the marketplace. And I know people don't always agree with policies like rent control, but
Mm-hmm.
we needed it here in Inglewood. I mean, we had situations where some of our tenants were experiencing 127% rent increase, literally doubling or more than doubling their rent overnight.
Wow.
They go from, $1,200 or $1,500 to $2,700 or $3,000 within a month, right? I mean, that's absurd. That's
Mm-hmm.
unheard of. No increased amenities, no sort of revitalization of their units or their complexes, just a flat out money grab. And there are a lot of mom and pops landlords who are doing the right thing in our community. So one of the things we pushed for um, was rent control, and we wanted to make sure that it took care of the moms and pops. And so we excluded units that were four or below, and especially if it was home or owner occupied.
Mm-hmm.
And we really targeted the units that were being purchased by corporations for five or more, and said, look, in the next 10 years or so, 50% of our community is going to be purchased and owned by external corporations and people who are not from Inglewood,
Mm-hmm.
if the trends continue. And then it'll only get even worse, right? So we wanted to make sure opportunity stayed here. We pushed the city to adopt an affordable housing policy. They're finally beginning to invest in and support affordable housing. They're now doing things like COVID relief for rent. That was not always the case here in this community, and I'm proud of the hard work that our coalition partners have done, like LA Voice and our faith partners, Holy Faith Episcopal and First United Methodist and others have done to Clue and 9 to 5 have done to really transform the work we're doing, the work that needs to, to transform the conditions we've all been facing here in the city. And at my organization at SJLI, sort of anchoring the coalition efforts, we knew we needed to do this because our young folk were ending up on the streets, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we complain about homelessness, but the investment in the systems that we need and the types of housing that we need are slow, and they're difficult to achieve. And so we have to do things now that address the needs that people have now. And again, change the very systems that lead to the conditions and outcomes that we all
Mhm.
face.
So you mentioned this coalition. So I'm assuming this is the Uplift Inglewood Coalition. Can you speak to some of their goals and objectives and successes to date? And I'm curious to know as well. I know Inglewood on the one hand, I think has about a 65% home ownership versus 35% renter, whereas I think in the city of LA is much larger renter population. So I assume on the one hand, some of these homeowners are sort of experiencing a little bit of surge in value. So how are they feeling about this investment and this newfound attraction of Inglewood, shall we say?
Yeah, I think it's been a sort of complicated scenario for a while. You're right. Here in Inglewood, we have about 63% in renters, and what we have found is that our homeowners are actually very happy, right? Many homeowners are very happy with their increased values. They feel like Inglewood is finally getting the amenities it deserves. It's getting the attention it deserves. There's a lot of pride in our community. One, for being from Inglewood, and then two, being able to be here in this community. There's a lot of pride in our city, and I will say that on the whole, there have been some benefits from these developments, right? I mean, I think the potential tax revenues that are going to come in from the stadium once we get through COVID could be substantial for the city. However, a lot of homeowners have been deeply concerned about issues related to traffic, right? There were situations where even when the forum was active, people who lived in development between the forum and Crenshaw were unable to get into their own homes
Sure.
because the streets were packed, right? There have been concerns about how we're going to do this within 2 miles, right? There's an intended the Inglewood Basketball and Entertainment Complex is being built, or rather, it looks like they finally have the final approvals to get that built. And our coalition, wanted to push the city to prioritize the use of public land for the public good, to make sure things like housing got built on public land, to make sure that public land, which is now being sold for private development purposes, to make sure that that public land was uh, creating the types of amenities that the public needs,
Hmm.
right? Our youth need a youth center. Our elders need more senior services. We are what's called a park poor community, right? We need more green space, right? So we wanted our city to utilize public land for the public good, to engage in smart economic development, not to stop development. I just want to be really clear about that, but to make sure that jobs were going to people who lived here in Inglewood, to make sure that there were long-term strategies to sustain economic development for people who live here by creating enterprise zones and uh, creating home ownership programs
Hmm.
so that people who are renters can move into positions where they could buy their home if you had grown up in this community. And so that's what Uplift Inglewood has been about. It's been all about responsible economic development. It's been about holding the city accountable to issues around policing, making sure that our educational systems are working and thriving. And so, as a coalition, which is comprised of businesses and residents and landlords and renters, right? We have a pretty wide tent. As a coalition, we have worked very hard to push the city to adopt policies and to also make sure that if new developers are coming in here, developers are coming into the community, that they pay their fair share and that they be good neighbors to the people who are here in this community.
No, that's great. So what are some of the initiatives that you all undertaken to engage stakeholders so that they are able and ready to participate in this development that's happening all around them?
There's a couple of ways that we one have been able to engage our stakeholders here in our community. One, we have been able to do things like tenants' rights workshops and forums, so that tenants know how to take advantage of the policies and the laws that have been passed that protect them. We've also worked with homeowners who want to maintain their properties to make sure that they don't increase their rent to exorbitant levels, right? We have a lot of so this is what we found. A lot of homeowners that are from Inglewood, who are also landlords and own units, they realize that these are their neighbors, right?
Right.
They're like, oh, I don't want to put my neighbor out on the street. I realize that, Uncle Frank and Aunt Mary, right? I know that they're down the street, and I've known them for 20 years, right? These are my friends, and I want to make sure they can still afford to live here. They're elders, they're on a fixed income. They're not going to put somebody like that out on the street. But when these corporations come in, right, they don't care about whether or not it's Aunt Mary or Uncle Frank. They only care about their bottom line, and they want to make money. And so, one of the things that we've worked with community members to do is to learn how to organize and
Mm-hmm.
how to have sort of tenant rights activities so that they can push back when those situations happen. We've also encouraged our residents to take advantage of home ownership programs and entrepreneurship programs. There are a number of programs that are in this area
Mm-hmm.
uh, through West Angeles, CDC, Community Development Corporation, as well as the South Bay Workforce Investment Board. We've helped direct our residents towards job opportunities, helped direct some of our young folk who were formerly incarcerated towards construction and career opportunities with the trades. And so there are a number of ways that we've been supporting folk, but we've also encouraged our business. We have a business expansion club here in the city of Inglewood to partner with each other and to support their efforts to improve their businesses so they can attract more business for
Mm-hmm.
themselves here in the local marketplace. In addition to doing things like pushing for rent control and pushing developers to provide community benefits for our youth and our community members.
Well, you touched on the issue of partnerships there, and we always, have a segment where we highlight the important role of collaboration and partnerships, since that's one of our goals for this program. So, speak to the role of partnerships for SJLI, and what are some of the successful partnerships that you can highlight, and some of the notable achievements you'd like to share.
Yeah, at the Social Justice Learning Institute, for us, we're a team-based organization. We work very closely as a team with other organizations to accomplish goals. And so we're members of a number of coalitions in Los Angeles County, such as the Brother Son Selves Coalition and the LA Youth Uprising Coalition, where we're pushing our county agencies and partners to move towards diversion and decarceration strategies to make sure that many of our young men, especially African American males, are not being locked up and sent to prison for offenses, for minor offenses and offenses that they otherwise could be diverted for. We're working closely with university partners to study issues related to gentrification here in the city of Inglewood and make sure that we can tell the story, and have hosted a number of events. We're working with our local artists to make sure that they have the capacity they need to use art as a tool to tell the story of what's happening in our community. We brought in and have been able to work with folk like Congresswoman Waters and Janelle Monáe to distribute food to our communities, as I mentioned quite some time ago. And that has allowed us to meet the needs of our residents, right? We've done backpack giveaways, food drives. We provided rental assistance with support from some of our foundation partners, housing assistance, utility bill payment assistance. We even have a program that helps that works with the utility agencies, so that, for example, you wanted to replace your ride with an electric vehicle, we can help you do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we know that people in our community are not always, one, aware of, or two, can even afford to get into an electric vehicle. And so we have a program to help them do that if they choose. And so that's through our partnership with the Liberty Hill Foundation and their Empower program. So there are a number of ways that we have been able to engage in our community. But I would say the most notable achievement that I want to lift up is what we've been able to do with our young folk. So as I mentioned to you earlier, a lot of our youth that have graduated from our programs many have gone on to college. But what I'm excited about is that those young men that have gone on either to college, or in some cases haven't even finished college, have been able to come back to our community and work with our organization.
Okay.
Some of them now are on staff. They're part of our team. They are helping to lead these programs. They are building a generation of leaders. And it reminds me of a sort of this Hebrew term, lador vador, right, which is from generation to generation. It's this idea of building leaders who can pass on their knowledge and their training and their strengths to another generation of leaders who can sustain that work and help that work grow. So for me, I've been really excited about that, and that is the epitome, I think, of our success and of our work. To have worked with these young men who are now men in their own rights who are giving back to our communities, who are transforming the lives of those who are coming up behind them. That's how this is all going to improve.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, what are your plans for SJLI, and how might others get involved in this work? You already have a lot of partnerships and a lot of collaborations, clearly, and you're touching a lot of lives. So, what's next for the organization, and how do others get involved? And what are the types of collaborations that you're looking for, ideally, to take you to the next level?
Yeah, we are very much involved in and engaged in expanding our work throughout LA County, and are certainly excited about working with many school districts to bring our programs to them to help serve more youth of color, young men and young women. And I think for us, as we continue to grow our work in places like San Fernando and Antelope Valley, and Long Beach and Compton and Inglewood and South LA, and even sort of further out, we recognize how important it is to partner with our institutions, our local school districts, our local health agencies, to make sure that the needs of young folk, especially during this pandemic, are taken care of. One of the things that I'm also proud of is that we distributed hundreds of laptops to youth in need in our community during at the start of the pandemic. Right? We didn't wait. We didn't waste any time. We ordered laptops. We got them in the hands of our young folk. Worked to get them Wi-Fi devices and hotspots. My team really stepped up to make sure families were taken care of. We partnered with some of our foundation, some of our local foundations to get grocery carts to families. We partnered with food agencies to make sure that our families got food immediately. And so I think for us, it's a matter of not only growing that work and expanding that work, but making sure that we're able to meet the needs of more people in our community. Finally, I would say that what we're looking to do is continue to expand our work nationally. We're currently in Texas, and we're looking to grow across the country, frankly,
Okay.
as we think about how we can scale up the models that we have built and developed, but also continue to strengthen the movement around improving conditions for boys and men of color. So that's where we are. And I think we're really excited about where we're headed.
That's great. So tell me, what does a thriving Inglewood look like in 5 to 10 years? You've got obviously a great rear view lens of what's happened in Inglewood in the past. You see what's happening currently. What does Inglewood look like to you in 5 to 10 years?
Well, in 5 to 10 years, I hope our community will still be a place of opportunity for people of color, and that we'll be able to slow down displacement and perhaps even reverse it. I know that there's a lot of development that's taking place and a lot of promises that have been made to folk in our community, and my hope is that um, this place will still be an affordable place for many of our families and our friends and the students that I serve. My hope is that we'll have a thriving, and I anticipate that we'll have a thriving school system and one that provides opportunity for all the youth in our community and is well respected. I hope that we will be able to have the right policies in place to take care of our residents, to make sure that they can move into positions of home ownership and move into business development. Be able to have business improvement districts in our community. Be able to have more green space, have better amenities, have more housing options, and sort of a series of things. Inglewood can be a model for equitable economic development.
Sure.
I don't know if that's going to happen. It doesn't look like we're on that path. It looks like the gentrification that we're experiencing might not help that type of vision come to fruition, but I do believe that we still have a shot to get there.
Okay. Well, we certainly will be, keeping a close eye on it because it's such an important community within our region. D'Artagnan, this has been a great conversation, and we're really excited to learn more about your work and applaud the work that you and your team have done to move Inglewood forward. Before we leave, we always end our podcast with just a little bit of a lightning round. And this is a chance to get to know you and your Los Angeles, or if you want, your Inglewood, so that our listeners can get a better sense of what's going on and the types of things that you engage in when you're not, making change in the community. So if you'll indulge us with a few lightning round questions.
Sure.
Okay. So the first few we already know the answers to, but I'm going to point them out anyway. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Inglewood. Yeah.
And where do you live currently?
I'm in Inglewood.
Okay. How do you get around? I know Inglewood's only 9 square miles. So how do you get around? Uber, Lyft, yellow cab, bike, bus, walk, metro, or scooter?
Oh, that's a great question.
It's only 9 square miles, 9.07 square miles.
Actually, my family, we have e-bikes. So we've been e-biking quite a bit.
I like that. Netflix, Amazon, Disney Plus, or Hulu?
Oh, my God. It all depends. But for me, it's Netflix. But when my kids are here, it's Disney Plus and all the way.
Okay, so this is going to be the important part. Favorite LA or favorite Inglewood restaurant?
The Serving Spoon here in Inglewood, one of my favorites.
Okay.
And the Rusty Pot. Plug for the Rusty Pot.
Rusty Pot.
Linda is absolutely amazing. She's in market. You got to go get her, her fried chicken. It's just
okay. Rusty Pot, got that. Okay, Lakers or Clippers?
Lakers, of course. Come on now.
Rams, Chargers.
Rams.
Dodgers, Angels.
Dodgers all the way.
Favorite park in Los Angeles or favorite park in Inglewood?
Great question. Ed Vincent Park is Centinela Park. It's a phenomenal park we have over here in Inglewood, but also Ted Watkins used to be one of my favorite parks as well.
Okay, and when you have a visitor to town from Houston, favorite place to take them in Inglewood?
Ooh, good question. Roscoe's. Come on, you got to take people to, especially you said Houston, so I got to take them to Roscoe's because we're going to be fighting about whose food is better.
All the healthy dining down there. So, final question: Bruins or Trojans?
I'm a come on. Look, A clap. Bruins all the way. I would never choose a university of second choice.
Okay.
No offense to all my Trojan friends, but
Judge Hayne, this has been a great dialogue, and really appreciate your time and appreciate all of your service to community. And thank you for really kicking off this conversation that we're going to have, looking at Inglewood and all the changes going on. So thank you again for being here. You've given us a lot to ponder as we move forward. To our audience, as always, thank you for tuning in, and we hope you'll enjoy this program and that you will join us next week as we have our second conversation with another leader moving Inglewood forward. Until we meet again, stay strong and get involved. To learn more about Civitas LA and share feedback on this program, or if you have a recommendation about future programs, please visit our website at www.civitasla.com. And we hope you'll connect with us on Facebook at Civitas LA, Instagram at Civitas_LA, and Twitter at Civitas_LA.